Ever stood under a sky so wide, your secrets felt small, here on the Cowboy Story. Time we ride the stories of the West, campfire truths, trail dust memories, saloon whispers. Gritty human, sometimes messy. Every tale is a horizon to chase. Subscribe, pull up a stool, and maybe find a little courage for your own frontier. The nail bit into dead wood and buckled the shingle. Mara Quinn steadied the ladder with her shin and hit it again. The windmill groaned behind the cabin, a long, tired creak that rose and fell with the blue norther coming down from the caprock. Dust tasted like salt. Her palms were split and stung with sweat. Molly the goat bleated at the empty trough. The sound made the crows lift off the fence and wheel away over scrub. Desert varnish flaked from the doorframe where the foreclosure notice was nailed, the red seal catching the sunlight like a drop of paint. 2 days. The paper did not care that her stomach was a fist. She set the hammer on a rung, pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, then drove the nail home. The roof would still leak. The wind climbed into the gap and laughed. "Hold on, Molly," she said. Her voice came out thin. "I'm working." The goat tossed her head. The windmill clacked. Far off, something heavy drummed the dry ground. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. Mara climbed down too fast. Her boots slipped, and she jumped the last 3 feet, knees jarring. She grabbed her father's pitchfork from the corner of the yard. The handle was polished by years, and a whittled bird was tied to it with twine, a little sparrow with one wing chipped. She held the fork across her chest and stepped into the open. 4 riders came over the swell sun on the iron of their bit rings, dust like smoke behind them. 3 wore trail sweat and sidearms. The 4th was easy to pick out even from a distance. Black coat, black horse, a silver inlay on the saddle that did not belong to this stripped land. He reined to a stop 20 yards from her. The horse tossed its head steam in the air. He did not look at the pitchfork. He looked past her at the roof line, the slumped lean-to-the-wire fence sagging into the grass. He turned in the saddle and studied the windmill, then the notch where the arroyo bent and cottonwoods made a thin green line. "Cottonwood Spring," he said, his voice carried, still running. One of the hands grunted. The other 2 watched her the way men watch weather. Mara swallowed. "You are trespassing." The man swung down. He was tall and moved like a man who wastes nothing. He took off his hat and brushed dust from the brim with his glove, then walked past her as if she were air. He pressed a gloved thumb to a fence post. The wood crumbled. He glanced toward the spring again, not at the water, but at the draw that fed it. She wanted to make herself bigger. The pitchfork felt like a toy. He finally looked at her. Close up, he was younger than she had imagined, maybe 35, face clean-shaven eyes, the color of weathered tin. They did not soften. "This parcel was transferred at 10 o'clock this morning," he said. "Bar A holds the deed, land improvements water." "It is my home," Mara said. "It was my father's before me." "Your father signed it as collateral. The bank did not invent the numbers." "I can work the debt." She hated the tremor in her throat. "I can sell milk. I can take in washing again. Give me until spring." A flicker ran through his face, gone so quickly she could have imagined it. He checked the wind and the slope again, then looked at the notice on the door. He did not come close to touch it. The wind does not wait. Her knuckles went white around the fork. Neither do men who want what does not belong to them. A hand shifted on a saddle behind him. The man with the red kerchief spat. The tall man did not react. He lifted his chin. "Ezra," he said without turning, "walk the fence line. I want it mapped to the ridge and down to the creek bend." "Yes, Mr. Ashford," the foreman said. So this was Rowan Ashford, Bar A Ashford. The story people told when they talked about losing. The man who ate property the way mesquite ate ground. "I'm not leaving," Mara said. He studied her for the first time. The sun showed her dirt, the raw cuts, the shirt she had stolen from her father's peg, and taken in at the sides the hunger set into her cheeks. "You have 48 hours," he said. "The bank will not argue the point." She took a step toward him. "I am not asking the bank. I am asking you." His eyes did not change. He put his hat back on. "See to the north posts, Ezra," he said. He swung up easy, the saddle leather creaking. "Check the gate by the wash." He turned the black horse and rode toward the thin line of cottonwoods, his men fanning out behind. The wind pushed dust into the air behind them until the riders dissolved back into the same pale that everything else lived in. Mara stood in the yard with the pitchfork until her hands stopped shaking. Molly bleated unhappy to find that nothing had changed. By night, the panhandle went hard and cold. The stars over the caprock were bright enough to hurt. In a 2-story house that had more rooms than 2 men could fill, Rowan Ashford poured whiskey and did not drink it. He tipped it into the ash at the hearth and watched it flash as it caught. The room smelled of smoke and saddle soap and oiled wood. An old upright piano stood under a dust sheet on the far wall. The corner of its lid was blackened where flame had licked and died. On the mantel, a small framed likeness of a woman with dark hair had been flipped face down. A silver ring sat beside it. The ring was plain and heavy. Ezra Pike sat in a chair close to the fire with a tin cup between his hands. His face was creased by sun and wind in a way that no dark could fill back in. He watched the flames, and not his boss. "Girl's got grit," Ezra said finally. "She was ready to put that fork through your ribs." "Grit does not change the notes," Rowan said. He set the bottle down, and the cork rolled on the table and knocked into the edge and stopped. "Cottonwood ties the north pasture. I want it under my thumb." "True," Ezra said. "Also true, the Quinn girl is alone." "She is not a line item I missed," Rowan said. He crossed to the desk and opened a leather ledger. The page showed numbers and names and little cuts of land shaded in Pencil Arroyo Road, Wolf Draw Kids Gate. He traced the line that marked the wash and the small streak of blue inked as the spring. He did not touch the photo or the ring. He kept his hand on the map. Ezra set his tin on his knee. "Whitcomb will serve the papers in the morning. I can fetch him, or the sheriff if you want it clean." "The law is not the problem," Rowan said. He shut the ledger. The room lost a sound when he did a quiet hiss of paper that had been pretending to be water. He looked at the dust sheet over the piano, and then away from it. "I will ride out." Ezra blew on his coffee and said nothing for a while. "Before the wind shifts, you mean?" Rowan put the ring back in a drawer and closed it. "Before the wind shifts." He did not sleep. He sat with the bottle turned to the light and counted the ticks of the big clock in the hall and listened to the house settle like an old bull in a pen. When the sky went the thin color before dawn, he stood and went to the tack room. He saddled the black horse with the bridle he used for hard trips and checked the cinch twice. His hands worked without needing his eyes. The yard at the Bar A was all frost and breath steam. He mounted and felt the horse step into the bit like it wanted to go. The trail to the Quinn place was the same broken line south he had ridden a dozen times with a different ledger in his head. This time, the ledger was not numbers. It was a roofline and a fence and the narrow of a woman's wrist when a hand closes by reflex. Mara did not sleep either. The stove went to coals and the draft sighed, and she lay with her eyes open and watched the rafters breathe. The notice on the door sounded like paper breathing in wind. When the frostlight came, she pulled on her boots and set the coffee to boil with the last of the grounds. The grounds looked like ants in water. The windmill clicked twice and then found its rhythm. Molly stamped in the pen. The goatskin hung in the doorway. She tied her hair back with a strip of cloth and felt her fingers shake. She set the pitchfork by the door and lifted the latch. Rowan's stallion stood in the yard, black against gray. The horse turned its head and white fog climbed from its nostrils. The rider dismounted and walked toward the porch boards that had bleached to the color of bone. He stopped at the threshold and took off his hat. He had not brought anyone with him. The wind pushed his coat and found the seam of the door. On the nail just above the latch, the red seal of the bank looked fresh against all that gray wood. He looked at the notice, and then at her face, and then past her to the bucket set under the leak in the corner that plinked once a thin little sound in the cold. "Miss Quinn," he said. "Mr. Ashford," she said. He held his hat in both hands. The air tasted like iron. "May I come in?" he said, "to discuss a solution." Mara looked at the pitchfork leaning against the wall, then at the goat in the pen, then at the coffee going bitter on the stove. She stepped back and left the door open. The wind shifted. Rowan stood just inside the door and let his eyes learn the room. Tin mug on the stove, threadbare quilt on the cot. Bucket under the drip in the corner, one plink for every breath. He looked at the red seal on the notice again, then at Mara. "You have no legal claim," he said. "As of 10 o'clock, Bar A holds deed in water." "I heard you the first time," she said. "Say what you came to say." "I need a wife," he said. The words were plain, not cruel. She blinked. The wind at the threshold lifted a strand of her hair. "You want to buy one." "I am offering a contract. You keep this cabin as your care goat and garden. You eat, you are clothed, you are protected. I require a wife and an heir. I do not require sentiment." Her mouth went dry. She could feel the splinters in the pitchfork handle against her palm, even though she was not holding it. "You are not asking me to live. You are asking me to survive your way. The alternative is the sheriff before sundown." She looked past him at the flat land and the line of cottonwoods. She thought about the laundry in town, bleach steam, and raw knuckles, the alley that smelled like spilled beer and old fruit, the red beard that leaned out of shadow. She thought about the wind on this ridge and how it knew her name better than any person. "What time?" she said. "Noon," he said. "Whitcomb's office." He put his hat on and left the door open for the wind to close. At 5 minutes to noon, Mara stood on the boardwalk in front of Whitcomb's sign and pressed both hands into the calico at her waist to still them. Inside, the clerk wiped his pen and blotted the page with fussy care. The room smelled like ink and dust and old coffee. Rowan stood to one side with his hat on his knee and his eyes on the papers. "Sign here," Whitcomb said. He did not meet her eyes. Mara set the pen on the line. Her name wobbled, then steadied. The clerk stamped the page and said a thin congratulations that sounded like air leaving a room. Rowan signed without pause. He did not offer his arm when they stepped outside. He tied his black horse mounted and rode toward the river road. Mara walked. Sweat ran down her back even though the wind kept her dress cold in the front. Men on the saloon porch stopped talking to stare. Mrs. Gable from the laundry paused her broom and watched like she was counting stains. A banker tilted his head toward a lawyer and smiled without moving his mouth. By the time she reached the cabin, the sky had gone, the hard blue that meant night would be sharp. She barred the door and sat on the cot and did not cry. She listened to the windmill find its slow rhythm and to Molly chew a splinter of wood and to her own heart knock against her ribs. She put her mother's quilt over her knees and waited for the first thing that would be different. It came at sunup. Ezra Pike brought a wagon and another hand. They lifted a real iron bed into the room, a thick mattress rolled tight like a bale. They carried in sacks of flour and beans, tins of coffee, a side of bacon onions in a crate. Salt and lye and matches lined up on the shelf like soldiers. "Boss says he will be by toward dark," Ezra said, touching his hat brim. "He will sleep in the barn. We put the bed here if that suits you." Mara nodded. Words felt loose in her mouth. Ezra looked around once, not with pity, but with the knowledge of a man who had done without. When they left, the room smelled like coffee and grease and fresh canvas. She touched the mattress and her fingers sank in. It felt like a trick. She moved the cot to the wall, set the tin mugs in a neat line, and scrubbed the table with a clean cloth as if clean wood would make the food last longer. At dawn the next day, a bucket of water sat on the step, cool and beaded, though the well was 100 paces. She lifted it with both hands and poured just enough into the pot to feel the sound. That afternoon, when she came in with an armful of mesquite, she found a chair by the table that had not been there before. Pine sanded smooth. Arms curved to fit the crook of an elbow. She set her palm on it and felt a small heat as if someone had just left it. Rowan did not come to the door. She saw him only on the roof coat and vest stripped shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. He moved shingles and rotten planks and drove nails like he was listening for a true note. The beat was steady. Bess bleated when the hammer paused, then quieted when it resumed. Toward evening the sky went green, and the wind turned cold as if someone had opened a cellar. The cottonwoods went still before they bent. Dust lifted and then flattened. Rowan crossed the yard with his saddlebags and pushed the door closed against the new pressure. "The barn will not hold heat," he said. He dropped his gear by the jamb and stood near the window eyes on the sky. Water threaded down the pane and then vanished as if a hand had wiped it from the other side. Mara lit the lamp and set a cup on the table and opened the bottle he had brought. Rye filled the room sharp and warm. She poured a little for herself and a little more for him. He sat when she sat. The table between them felt both too small and too wide. "You worked in town," he said. She tipped the cup and watched the light move in the liquid. "Bleach burns your lungs if the room is small. The old irons scorch your hands if you forget to wet the rag. The men who drink before noon think day wages buy more than shirts." He set his cup down. The muscle in his jaw moved, the red bearded one. "Burl Slade," she said. The wind shoved at the walls. Rain hit sideways. The roof held. He stared at the lamp flame. He did not say he was sorry. He did not talk about law. He said, "He will not touch you again," and he said it like a fact, the way he said the spring tied his north pasture. They drank without toasts. The fire ticked, and the roof drummed, and the window breathed in and out. When she rose to bank the stove, he stretched out by the hearth on a folded coat. The floorboards were rough. He did not take the bed. She picked up her mother's quilt and set it gently over his shoulders. His hand snapped to her wrist before his eyes opened. His grip was iron, and then it was air. He looked at her hand where it lay on the quilt. He let go like he had touched a hot stove. She stepped back. "You looked cold," she said. Her voice sounded young. He rolled to face the fire and said nothing more. In the slate light of morning, the storm had walked north. The world felt scrubbed and thinner. He was gone from the hearth, and the door was looped on the inside. Outside, she found another full bucket and a bundle of something heavy wrapped in brown paper on the step. Inside was a dress deep blue, with a plain white collar and sleeves that would not catch on buckets. Her eyes burned. She set the package on the chair and pressed her palm into the new cloth and had to sit. On the third dawn, she went to the creek to wash before the heat returned. The water ran black in the shade of the bank. She left her dress on the grass and stepped into the slow pull and felt the mud squeeze between her toes. The cold climbed her shins and tightened her breath. She dipped under hair heavier on her neck when she stood. On the ridge above, a horse shifted. She did not scream. She crossed her arms and watched the black stallion toss its head and the rider sit like stone. Rowan's face looked carved and hurt. He turned the horse with a jerk and drove it along the ridge like he had been spurred himself. The next afternoon, a square paper parcel sat on the table when she came in with a load of wood. She untied it with a ragged breath and found a spool of good thread lamp oil and a small ticking of heirloom seed. Bluebonnet, the paper said in faded ink. Aster. She cupped the seeds in her palm and felt how light something can be and still matter. A week later, a boy from the McCrae place trotted into the yard with his pony blowing and handed her a folded card with flower prints along the edge. Their new barn was going up. The whole canyon was invited. Work by day food and fiddles by night. Rowan returned by dusk. She set the invitation on the table where he could see it. He read and nodded once. "We will go," he said. "I cannot stand in a yard while people count how I breathe," she said. "They will watch me and joke about you." "I do not answer to them," he said. "You are my wife. You will be seen as my wife." She slept badly and woke early and wore the blue dress. It fit, as if it had been measured. He brought a bay mare from his own remuda for her. She swung into the saddle and felt the horse fold under her like a handshake. They rode side by side across the short grass, while the sun rose behind them and made long shadows of their legs. The McCrae place boiled with bodies. Men on rafters shot nails through air and women lined up pies like troopers. The music had not started yet, so the sound was all hammer and spoon and a baby that refused to be soothed. When Rowan stepped down, he did not offer his hand. He stood close enough behind her that she could feel his shirt brush her shoulder. Heads turned. Conversation broke and reformed in smaller pieces. Mrs. Gable held a ladle like a scepter and tipped it to her friends. Whitcomb examined the sky as if he expected weather inside a clear day. Royce Talbot, tall and spare, looked across his cup and smiled without teeth. Rowan kept his palm on the small of her back. It did not feel like a caress. It felt like a brand. Sarah McCrae came forward with her hair pinned hard and spoke Mara's new name as if tasting it for the first time. They both smiled with courtesy and not warmth. Rowan did not introduce anyone. He stood and turned a slow circle with his eyes and dared a mouth to open. Mara moved away for water when she could. Behind the porch, two older women shelled peas and told a story about a woman with silk gloves and a heart like flint, a man who burned his piano and learned to sleep with both eyes open. Mara listened without stopping. She felt something move inside her that was not quite pity and not quite fear. On the way back to the yard, someone stepped in front of her. He smelled like whiskey left in a hot wagon. Burl Slade's red beard was threaded with dust. His nose bent wrong to one side. "Look at you," he said, fingers closing around her arm. "Sunday laundry in a church dress." "Let me go," she said. "Tell your new man how you used to scrub collars," he said, breath sour. "Maybe I should tell him for you." She tried to pull free. His grip tightened. The wind brought the scent of creosote and something else like iron, like a storm that was not in the sky. Slade, a voice said, "Not loud, flat as a stone." Rowan stood 2 steps away with his coat off and his sleeves rolled. His hands were empty. "This is a private talk," Slade said. He did not let go. Rowan moved from still to close. He did not swing for the jaw. He drove his fist in a short, sharp arc at the place where bone had been broken before. The sound was a wet crack. Slade's eyes went slack, and he folded to the dirt like a sack of meal. Silence went over the yard like a sheet. The fiddler put his bow down. Someone's spoon tapped the edge of a bowl and then stopped. 2 men near the fence took a step forward and then took it back when Rowan looked at them. He took Mara by the elbow and walked her through the open mouth of the crowd. He lifted her to the bay with a strength that felt like anger and then put himself in the saddle and turned both horses toward the ridge. They rode until the sound of the yard turned to crickets. The moon made silver out of the mesquite and gave back a little to the faces of the horses. Rowan's breath came out hard and slow. "I did not encourage him," she said. Her voice was small but did not shake. "I know who he is," Rowan said. They rode a little longer. The windmill at her place ticked into hearing, one click, then two. "I am trouble for you," she said. "I make men talk. I make the town put your name in their teeth." He pulled the stallion to a halt so fast the horse danced on its front feet. He turned his head and looked at her. His face had lost its anger. It looked tired and honest. "You are not a burden," he said. Then he put his heel to his horse, and the road opened in front of them. They reached the cabin with the moon low and white. Rowan led the bay to the lean-to and checked the latch twice. He did not come inside. Mara sat at the table with her hands around a cold cup until the lamp guttered. At first light he stood in the doorway with his saddlebags over one shoulder. Frost smoked from the fence wire. "I'm riding the high pasture," he said. "Cattle on the rim. 5 days, maybe 7. Ezra will look in on you." "How long is 5?" she said, as if it were a weight you could lift. He did not answer that. "Bolt the door at night." He was gone before the steam left the coffee. The days stretched thin and sharp. She mended wire. She hauled rock out of the garden plot until her palms bled in half-moons. She cut mesquite and stacked it neat against the cabin wall. She worked because she could think while working, and because the bed felt too soft when the wind fell quiet. On the 6th evening she sat in the pine chair and meant to rest with her eyes closed and woke to gray. Her boots were off and lined up by the door, the quilt pulled to her chin. Coffee sighed on the stove. Rowan stood at the hearth with trail dust on his shoulders and a face like a man who had not slept. "You are back," she said. "You fell asleep," he said. His voice was raw at the edges. He turned away. "Eat." Her feet felt small without the boots he had unlaced. She watched him pick up his saddlebags and leave for the barn without touching anything else. She could not name what that made inside her. Later in the garden she was on her knees among the bean rows when his shadow crossed the dirt. She stood and wiped her hands on her skirt. He did not speak. He held out his open palm. A little knot of flowers lay there, purple asters and stubborn yellow stems too short. "They were by the creek," he said. His eyes were on the flowers, not on her. Her fingers brushed his as she took them. It was a small touch. It went through her like lightning. "Thank you," she said. He put his hat back on and walked toward the ridge with long, even strides. The wind shifted that night and grew heavy. By afternoon, the blue of the sky had a sick green under it. The cottonwoods went quiet. Dust flattened. Rowan crossed the yard with his saddlebags and pushed the door closed. He dropped the bags and set his hands on the table to steady the room. "The barn will not hold heat," he said. "The animals will, I will not." Mara lit the lamp. She poured rye. The rain hit first like pebbles and then like hands. The roof held. The window breathed in and out. He sat across from her and left a palm flat on the table as if to feel the grain. "You set a quilt over me," he said after a while. "You looked cold." He took a long drink and set the cup down with care. "My mother died with me in her body," he said. 19 years old. The doctor was a day away. My father did not touch me after that. He was not cruel. He fed and clothed me. He taught me to read. He did not put a hand on me once. He looked at me like a number in a ledger. She held her cup and did not blink. The rye burned all the way down. "When my mother got sick, I took in shirts at the laundry," she said. "I boiled cloth until my hands were white lace. When she died, my father fell into a bottle and never climbed out. Burl Slade tried to pull me into a dark place by the saloon, and I cracked his nose with a stick. He bled and called me trash." Rowan's jaw worked. The rain grew louder. The lamp threw a tight ring of light. He reached across the table and stopped before he touched her. The space between hand and skin felt like a live wire. She leaned into the space and closed it with the side of her face. He made a sound like something breaking free. He came around the table and pulled her to her feet and kissed her with a hunger that felt like breath after drowning. She answered with both hands in his shirt, her heart beating against his ribs. The room went smaller and warmer. The storm leaned on the walls, and the fire climbed and fell and climbed again. Later they lay shoulder to shoulder under the quilt. The lamp was low. The air held the smell of rain and wood smoke and skin. Rowan's arm was heavy over her ribs. He did not speak. His breath found a slow track. She stared at the shadow of the windmill on the wall and waited for the door in her chest to close. It did not. At first light he was already dressed. He stood by the door with his hat in his hand and his mouth a thin line. "The storm broke," he said. "I will see to the animals." He left so fast the latch was still moving. She lay in the cool. His body had left and felt the ache of a thing opened and then covered again. She got up and banked the stove and washed her face and put her hands to work. Town was hot and bright. The road in front of the saloon was chalked with boot prints, and the doors stood open to let out the smell of whiskey and sweat. Mara tied the bay and was about to step into the mercantile when a voice caught her ear. "Man's gone soft," someone said from inside the bar. "Wrapped up by that little wife. Sounds like the East woman all over again." She knew the other voice. Mr. Whitcomb made vowels sound clean even when they were not. If he prefers charity cases, that is his ledger. A third voice, Royce Talbot, light and cold. He bought a wife to keep his pride. We all saw it. Mara froze with one hand on the doorframe. She had not thought to hear Rowan's voice next. He spoke quiet. It reached her like a blade under a coat. "My wife is my business," he said. "Keep her name out of your mouths." He did not say she was a good woman. He did not say the men were wrong. He threw a wall around his property and stood behind it. She went breathless for a second, and then drew in air that tasted like old beer. She let the mercantile door swing shut, and walked back to the mare and waited with her hand on the rein leather. Her face felt like someone had pressed a hot cup to both cheeks. Rowan came out a few minutes later with dust on his boots and a face like a door. He looked at her once and looked away. They rode side by side without talking. The sound of the windmill reached them before the cabin showed. Molly called from the pen. The sky wore a pale, thin blue like china before it cracks. Inside the cabin, he poured water in the basin and scrubbed trail from his hands and face. He set the towel on the nail and turned. She stood by the table with her fingers on the chair he had built. "So that is it," she said. Her voice was not loud. It cut clean. "I am your business." He frowned. "I told them to keep your name out of it." "You told them I was a thing you own," she said. "You did not tell them they were wrong. You punched a man for putting his hand on me, and I am grateful. But when words mattered, you guarded your pride, not me." His mouth opened and shut. "I handled it." She laughed without humor. "You handled me. You bought a wife who would not leave. You bought silence and a roof and called it clean. Last night was not a contract." He flinched at that and schooled his face. "I do not owe those men explanations." "You owe me one." Her hands shook, so she stilled them on the chair back. "I thought you were safe. Not kind. Not sweet. Safe. Then you stood in a room and told them I was your business. I would rather be laundry trash on my knees than a ledger item with a blue dress." The wind outside had a different sound. It ran straight and thin out of the north and slid under the door. A taste of iron rose in the air. "You are not a burden," he said again. The word sounded used up. "You are not ice," she said. "You are scared." He took a step forward. She took one back. "Do not call me that." "What else is it?" she said. "You let a dead woman in a banker's mouth tell you who I am. You let fear run you like a herd." He stood very still. His hands were fists at his sides. He did not speak. She turned and pulled her father's old coat from the peg and set it over her shoulders. She took her calico dress from the chest and folded it small. She put her mother's thin quilt in the sack and the little whittled sparrow from the pitchfork and a half loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "What are you doing?" he said. "It came out low and dangerous." "I am leaving," she said. She did not look at him. "I will walk to town. I will find work. I will not be your business. You will die on the trail if the wind turns. I would rather be in the open." She found a scrap of paper from the mercantile and a bit of charcoal from the hearth and wrote with a hand that did not shake. She set the note in the center of the table. She lifted the latch. The first breath of the blue norther hit her full in the face. It was dry and cold as coins. The windmill cried once and began to count. She stepped into the yard and pulled the door behind her until it caught. The wind hit her like a door. It stole the wet from her eyes and slid a knife along her teeth. Mara set her head down and walked into it. The sky had gone a flat white that looked like old bone. Snow came sideways first, as dust, then as grit, then as sheets that erased the trail and the fence, and the low ridge where the windmill should be. Her coat turned stiff as bark. Her hands went dumb inside the sleeves. She tried to count steps. She reached 10 and lost the number and started again. The quilt over her shoulders iced and pulled her forward from the weight. Her breath scratched. Her knee found a rock under the powder and she went down hard. For a moment the ground felt warm the way a fever feels warm, and the snow against her cheek felt like a pillow. She curled smaller and pulled the quilt over her head and listened to the storm calm inside the little tent of cloth. Sleep reached for her with clean hands. Rowan hit a dead run the second the latch clicked. The stallion had no saddle. He threw a blanket on and jammed the bit until the horse tossed foam, then hauled himself up and drove his heels. The yard vanished behind him. Fence posts rose and passed like ghosts. The world had no edges. He kept his eyes low and looked for any shape that did not belong to scrub and drift. He almost missed her. The quilt was white on white and her hair had turned to ice. Only the small dark of her boot against the drift gave him a direction. He slid from the horse and went down to his hips in the powder. He tore the quilt back. Her lashes were rhymed. Her lips were the color of creek stones. He said her name, and it did not sound like his voice. He said it again and again until her eyes fluttered pale and wrong. He wrapped her in his coat, shoved the quilt under her to keep the snow from her back, and lifted. She was nothing in his arms. He threw her across the stallion and climbed behind her and held her against him with both arms, and drove the horse for the dark square of the cabin. The wind moved like a thing alive. The horse staggered into the yard and nearly fell at the door. Rowan did not bother with the latch. He kicked the plank near the bar, and the wood jumped and let him through. Inside, it was as cold as outside. He set her on the bed and went to his knees on the floor. He cut her boots off with his knife. The socks made a sound like paper. Her feet looked like candles. He rubbed them hard with both hands until color tried to return. He stripped the quilt and peeled her coat and dress and chemise all heavy with melt, then grabbed the blankets from his bedroll and the one from the chair and built a nest around her that made only her face show. He threw wood on the coals and begged the fire to be greedy. He poured whiskey into a tin and held it to her lip and tilted. She coughed and took a short swallow and coughed again. "Stay," he said, and his voice broke on the word. Her eyes found him. They looked like old glass. She tried to speak and could not. He took her hand, all bone and ice, and closed his fingers over it. He set his forehead on the blanket near her shoulder and spoke into the wool so the room did not have to hear. "I was a coward," he said. "You were right. I let men speak you small so they would not speak me small. I thought if I kept you behind a wall I did not have to call you what you are. I love you. I have loved you since you stood in a yard and lied to a man with a ledger and called a shack a home. I love you and it terrifies me. There is no ledger for it. I have no map." Her breath steadied under the blankets. The lamplight shook. The storm pulled a long howl along the eaves and then held it. She blinked and water slid from the corner of one eye. It ran into her hair. "I thought I was not worth the breath to defend," she said. The words were faint and shaped like they hurt. "I thought laundry trash was my only name." He lifted his head and took both her hands and blew on them like kindling. "You are my name," he said. "You are my house. I am sorry." The fever that follows frost came and went and came again. He stayed by the bed through the dark and into the late morning. When she slept, he covered her. When she woke, he made her drink. He did not leave her except to feed the fire. When she slept deep and easy, he put his face in his hands and breathed until the knotted rope in his chest loosened. By noon, the sky went bright and wide. He saddled the black with clean tack and hitched the wagon. He helped Mara into the seat and set the blue dress beside her with careful hands. They rode into Tascosa with the sun in their eyes. The town looked up and then looked again. He stopped in front of the saloon and tied the reins in a neat figure. He stepped down and turned to her. He lifted her to the ground and did not let go right away. Inside, tables stilled. Royce Talbot's hand hovered over his glass. Whitcomb stood near the bar and measured the room like a surveyor. Burl Slade was not there. News travels in clean lines on clean days. Rowan led her to the center of the floor. He faced the men who talked about other people's homes like they were puzzles. His voice found the right place and did not waver. "This is Mrs. Ashford," he said. "Her name is Mara. She is my wife in truth and in law. You will speak her with respect." Whitcomb smiled small. A noble announcement, less noble to purchase a bride. Rowan took one long step and took the front of the man's vest and lifted. The room sucked air. Whitcomb's feet scraped the boards. Rowan drew his fist. He wanted to feel something break. He did not want to stop. A hand set on his wrist. He looked down. Mara shook her head once. "We will not be them," she said, not quiet and not loud. He set Whitcomb down. The clerk stumbled and caught himself on a table and did not look up again. Rowan stood with his chest rising and falling like he had run. He took Mara's hand and set it on his arm for anyone with eyes to see. They walked out into the good light like they owned the day. Work washed the anger from his body better than water. He swung a hammer on the porch frame while Ezra set posts and checked the plumb. The smell of sap and sawdust rode the air. On a weekday afternoon, the yard did not look like a yard. It looked like a place where people might stop and stay. Children came with Sarah McCrae, 2 boys with straw in their hair and bare feet and a look like a dare. Mara set a Bible on the new rail and taught the shapes of letters in a voice that made the words feel like river stones you could pocket. Rowan watched from the yard and did not climb the steps. He liked the sound better from a little distance. It settled him. He did not think about a lid charred black under a sheet in a different room. He thought about a chair that fit an elbow and a bucket that showed up full and seeds buried in tight dirt that would be green in their own time. Tascosa had other sounds. Near the tack racks of the mercantile, a low talk ran under the clink of buckles. Royce Talbot stood with 2 men who wore their pistols tied down. Their hands sat high and easy near the grips. They smelled like horse and old sweat in the road. Southbox Royce said. He had a folded map under his palm. Drive them hard at pre-dawn. They will be bunched by the canyon mouth. Cut them right and left and run the point through the wash. Ashford will be watching his wife and not his herd. One of the drifters grinned without showing his gums. Heard the man got soft. Mara had come in for needle and thread, and the salt Ezra had forgotten. She stilled in the shadow of a stack of fly blankets and listened without moving. Her heart found the bad rhythm it kept for storms. She paid for her packet of needles with the credit Rowan had ordered, and smiled at the clerk as if she had not heard a plan to gut their year. She rode the bay hard along the wash and slid from the saddle before the horse had stopped moving. Rowan and Ezra were spread over a table with a pencil and a scrap of butcher paper. Dust ran in lines along the boards. Royce and 2 guns, she said. Her voice was short of breath. South box, before dawn, cut and scatter. Ezra swore and reached for his hat. Rowan went still like a cat when it hears a sound under a floor. He folded the paper once slow and neat. We go tonight, he said. He did not look at Mara like she had stepped outside her place. He looked at her like a man looks at a partner. Stay close to Ezra. Do not try to be brave with your body. Be brave with your eyes. The canyon held the night like a bowl. Stars fitted into the rim. The herd breathed in a long animal sound that had 1,000 throats. Rowan took 6 men he trusted to move stones in their hats. They climbed the slick rock and found the spines that let them lie and not slide. Ezra set Mara behind a tooth of sandstone with a view of the trail and a narrow angle for a shot. Hours went by without changing much. The cold found the joints and set up shop. The cattle shifted and snorted. A nightbird called and went quiet when new sound came. 3 riders. The canyons have a way of telling you exactly how many boots approach. Rowan lifted 2 fingers. The men sighted without a word. Royce slid from his horse and drew down rock like he owned the dark. The 2 drifters stayed high in the saddle. Rowan called. Guns on the ground, he said. Walk backward with your hands up. Royce laughed and opened fire. The canyon tore with it. Sparks jumped from stone. Mara set her sights on the left drifter and squeezed. Dust hurled from the rock near his boot, and he ducked and lost his line. Ezra's round took the other man's hat into the air. Rowan and Royce worked the thin line between cover and luck. Rowan rolled and fired twice and moved again. Royce broke for the horses. Rowan Ezra yelled. It came late. Royce's wild round caught Rowan high near the collarbone. He went backward on his elbow and hit hard and sucked air. He put his palm over the hot place and felt wet. He still had the pistol. He steadied it with his wounded arm and shot one more time. Royce dropped his gun and grabbed at his shoulder and sat in the dust with his mouth open like a man who has run out of words. The 2 drifters lifted their hands and stood very still. Mara did not remember climbing down. She was with Rowan and the ground moved but did not help. Ezra and 2 hands took care of Royce and the drifters while she pressed cloth against the wound and counted to 3 and changed cloth and counted again. Rowan's face had lost color. He blinked like a man underwater. Talk to me, she said. Too loud, he said, which meant nothing and everything. She squeezed his hand and felt him squeeze back. They got him to the wagon and across the flats with the wheels singing and the horses wet. In the cabin, she ordered Ezra out with the steady voice she used for letters. She boiled water and whiskey and dropped the needle and knife into the pot. She laid out rags the way a woman lays out Sunday bread. She opened the wound with the tip of the blade and watched for the shine of the lead. Rowan went somewhere behind his eyes and then came back with a sound that shook the walls. She found the bullet near the bone and dug it free and dropped it into a tin where it clicked like a coin. She poured whiskey and it bubbled on the meat. She threaded the needle and closed him neat and tight. The fever came as the night walked toward morning. He tossed and searched for air that was not there. He said a name that was not hers, a young one that made her heart squeeze. Then he said hers and held on to it like a rope. She mopped his face and wrung the cloth and set it back and made him swallow water when he could. She did not stop. The windmill clicked each hour and counted the time she stole back from a dark place. Near dawn, his skin cooled under her hand, his breath evened. The room exhaled with him. He opened his eyes and found the ceiling and then her. You are a tyrant, he whispered. It sounded like a prayer. She put her face in the warm space where his neck met his shoulder and let herself cry without noise. He set his good hand in her hair and held it there like a blessing. Rowan slept in fits for 2 days while the fever ebbed. When he woke for good, the light at the window was the color of milk, and the room smelled clean. He turned his head. Mara sat on the pine chair with her hair braided, one hand on the quilt near his shoulder, the other around a cup that sent up a thin steam. "You are here," he said. "I am here," she said. He tried to sit up and hissed when the stitches pulled. She pressed her palm to his good shoulder and eased him back. She gave him water. He took her wrist and lifted it and kissed the scars in her palm. She exhaled like a door has opened. Summer picked up the yard and set it right. Ezra brought lumber and a box of nails that chimed in his hands. Rowan worked from the porch steps with his arm in a sling. He set boards on sawhorses and measured twice and cut once. The hammer found a steady beat that kept time with the windmill. When he tired, he sat and watched the sun paint stripes on the new planks. Mara taught on the porch 2 afternoons a week. Sarah McCrae's boys came first with their hair slicked and clean ears, then Tanner's girl with her ribbon, then 2 young hands from Bar A, who had learned to ride before they learned to hold a pencil. They labored through letters while Molly watched from the pen and chewed whatever weeds she could reach through the wire. Mara's voice ran soft and stern and patient. She tapped the page with her finger and made the air sound like river. When Rowan could stand a full hour without swaying, he went to town with a sealed envelope in his coat. He walked into Wickham's office without taking off his hat. "Draw it," he said. He set the envelope on the desk. Whitcomb opened it and stared at the deed inside with its fresh seal and neat new line that read Mara Quinn Ashford. He smiled over the paper. "For the lady," he said. His smile had teeth. "Wrong," Rowan said. "Draw it with 2 names." Whitcomb's smile thinned, unusual. "Fix it," Rowan said. That afternoon, Rowan brought the paper home. He laid it out on the table like a Sunday loaf. The ink shone wet. "It is yours," he said. "I was late knowing it. I am not late now." She looked at the clean black of their names. She looked at his face. She went to the shelf and brought down the little sparrow her father had whittled and set it on the corner of the deed to keep it flat. "We sign together," she said. Her thumb found his. He picked up the pen. She set her hand over his and steadied it for the first letter. The nib scratched loud in the quiet room. When the porch was finished, the house lost its flinch. The new roof reached out beyond the door and made shade that did not run at noon. The rails were sanded smooth and the posts ran straight. Rowan hung his razor and strop on a hook near the basin. Mara shelved her mother's Bible and a thin book of poems above the hearth. The chair he had made fit under the window where light fell clean. They went to the creek as the day let go of its heat. Cottonwoods threw coins of light on the water. The bank held damp under their boots. The air smelled like green things and silt. Rowan took off his hat and held it in both hands. "No church," he said. "No music but this." She nodded. "I will not be cold," he said. He could not look away from her. "I will stand in front of what comes. I will speak your name first. I will not let men make you small to keep me large. I will not run," she said. "I will take the door off its hinges. I will stand with you when the wind shifts. I will make a roof and keep a fire." He closed the space between them. He kissed her like a promise and not a question. The creek moved around stones and carried their quiet away and made more of it downstream. In Tascosa, people tried new words when she passed. Mrs. Gable said Mrs. Ashford as if she had practiced it at her sink. Whitcomb tipped his hat without meeting anyone's eye. Ezra bought a bag of nails and got 2 for free without asking. Royce Talbot did not come into town for a while. On the porch, the children wrote their names slow and careful. The littlest boy wrote home and turned the paper and wrote it again to make sure it stayed. Rowan stood in the yard with his hands on his hips and his face in the sun until the letters stopped swimming. He did not go up the steps until the lesson ended, and then he did not want to come down. Mara planted the seeds Rowan had brought in a ring around the foundation. Bluebonnets pushed up first, and then asters stubborn and bright. The beds held heat after sunset, and the flowers kept their color until the last light went. The earth smelled like rain even when the sky had been stingy. When she watered, the dust settled and the porch boards went darker in strips, and it pleased her for no reason she could say. A week before the drive, Rowan sat her down at the table again. He lifted the deed, turned it so it faced her, and smoothed the corner where the sparrow had left a mark. 2 names, he said. She traced the letters with her finger and smiled into her hand. 2 names, she said. Ezra called from the yard and asked after a length to cut, and Rowan got up to measure. Mara folded the deed and slid it into the wooden box with the extra needles and the little tin that held the bullet she had taken from his shoulder. She sat for a moment with her palm flat on the lid. That evening the heat left the ground in a slow lift. They saddled the bay and the black and rode side by side up the low ridge where the first day had broken her breath. The cabin sat below them like a toy, and then like a real thing as the light changed. Smoke made a thin line over the chimney. The porch threw a steady rectangle of shade. The garden was full, and the flowers careless and alive. Mara leaned her head on Rowan's shoulder. He set his arm around her and pulled her in. The horses blew and cropped at the grass in front of their feet. The wind moved through the grass, and the sound ran along their skin. "This feels like a house," she said. "It is your house," he said. His voice went rough. "I am a lucky man to live in it." They sat that way until the light slid off the land. The windmill turned in a patient half-circle and then another. The first star showed above the canyon rim, and then two, and then more. When they turned the horses, the night came with them like a shawl. The road down was easy in the soft dark. The porch took their weight, and the door swung open, and the room smelled like coffee and wood, and a little like rye where a drop had been spilled. The bed was made. The chair was under the window. The house breathed them in. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.